Hello and welcome. My name is Irma and you can find me on YouTube, Ravelry and Instagram as Wolwerkjes. This video is not about all the things I make, but this is a knitting techniques video. This is not a tutorial about how to do stitches, but I'm explaining a little bit more about the difference between two stitches, which are the brioche stitch and the fisherman's rib. There is a lot of discussion about those two stitches. Are they the same? Are they not? And I will explain that to you in this video. So here I've got two swatches. This one is knit in fisherman's rib technique and this one is knitted in the brioche technique. And I did it in two colors so you can see the texture a little bit better, because in one color it can be a little bit hard. And as you can see, when you knit fisherman's rib, you have these loops in between your stitches, and you got the same with a brioche stitch. So when you look just at the fabric, you get an identical structure. Don't look at the edges, they're a little bit messy. It's just the main stitch I want to talk about. So in the fabric you don't see a difference in the texture of the fabric. So this is the back, and again the same, the texture is exactly the same. You can see differences in the puffiness, I don't know how to say it else, in the size of the stitches, although they are knit on the same size needle. So they do look a little bit different, but that can also be the way I tension my yarn and stuff like that. And this one is still on a gable and this one is squashed together on a stitch holder, so that also affects how it looks. But in my opinion, this one gives a little bit bigger stitches than the brioche does. I think this is a little bit easier to get consistent, so every stitch is the same size, where in brioche it's a little bit harder for me to get the same size of stitches. So I will show you the difference in how the stitch is made, because that's the only difference between brioche and fisherman's rib. The fabric you get is exactly the same, only the way you get the stitches is different. So I'm working in two colors, but I'm going to show you, this is not a tutorial for how to knit brioche or fisherman's rib, only the difference between the two. And I will show you the basic stitch of brioche, so you can compare, and the basic stitch in fisherman's rib, so you can compare the two. For brioche you have stitches with yarn overs around them and you have normal stitches. What you do with the stitch with the yarn over is that's the one you knit with the yarn over together, so like this. The stitch that doesn't have a yarn over, you slip and you make a yarn over. This one has a yarn over, so you knit it together. This one hasn't, so you make yarn over. And that's how you do brioche. So you create extra loops around every other stitch, and in the next row you knit those together with the stitch. That's what's happening over here, and your stitch gets like a extra loop of yarn around it. That's the effect you get. In one color and two colors it's both the same, only I did two colors to make it a little bit easier to see. So that's how you knit a brioche stitch. So I switched the fisherman's rib knitting onto my needle, and I will show you how you do a fisherman's rib technique to get the same fabric as brioche, where you make yarn overs in a brioche pattern. You get this effect by knitting into the stitch under the stitch on your needle in fisherman's rib. So normally you would knit this stitch, and in fisherman's rib you will knit the stitch underneath, and when you do that, the stitch above makes that loop you get when you do brioche, only you don't have to make the yarn over. You get the effect by skipping that stitch but knitting the stitch below. The next one will be a purl stitch, and this stitch will be the yarn over, if you want to call it, the loop of yarn that gets around the stitch on the other side. So that's what you do. So you knit one in the stitch below, and you purl one, and you knit one in the stitch below, and you purl one. And by doing that, you create those, by doing this stitch, you create this extra loop around your stitch. So this one will be knitted in the stitch below. And this looks a little bit different, but it's only because it's tied around the needle now, so I can fiddle it around to make it look the same, but once you have the fabric growing, it will disappear, as you can see. The only thing that's happening there is that the placement of the stitches is a little bit different, but the effect is completely the same. So it's just what you prefer, because what this means is that when you have a pattern in brioche but you prefer the fisherman's rib technique or the look of the stitches in fisherman's rib, you can just swap them out. They're exactly the same. If you want to see me do the techniques in more detail, let me know. I will be very happy to make a video about that. But for now, I just wanted to show you the difference in the techniques. You get exactly the same fabric. The only difference is how you make that fabric. And I am more used to the brioche, but I'm doing a project in fisherman's rib now, and I really like that the stitches puff a little bit more in this technique. I think I prefer the look of the fisherman's rib, and I think it's more even when I do it compared to the brioche, because the size of the extra loops you get is determined by your knitting needle and the way you knit, and not by how tight your yarn over is. And I think it's easier to knit consistently than it is to make a yarn over consistently, but that can only be my experience and the way I work it. But yeah, the structure of the stitch is exactly the same. And it's also possible to transit in between. I wouldn't recommend that because, as you can see, you get a little bit of a different look, but it is possible to go from brioche to fisherman's rib and the other way around just by reorganizing your stitches. So you have seen a close-up of those two stitches, the brioche and the fisherman's rib. I know I will get complaints like they don't look the same, but that's not because the fabric isn't the same, it's because of the way you create those fabrics. It's the same, for example, like when a person holds the yarn in his left hand when knitting stockinette stitch and suddenly changes to holding the thread in their right hand. the fabric they get is still a stockinette stitch. The way the thread goes through the fabric is exactly the same. The only difference is that it will look different because you use your other hand and you're not used to that. So I think it's not exactly the same as that, but it's like that difference. So the way the threads go through the fabric is exactly the same, only the way you made it is a little bit different, and that's why it can look a little bit different when the same person uses both techniques. Some people will get a different look of their brioche stitch when they knit brioche than I maybe have, or have a different look of Fisherman's rib than I have. So it's also dependent on the person that's knitting it, of course. Well, because I get a different look in brioche and Fisherman's rib, I have to be conscious when interchanging those. Like maybe one of them takes up a little bit more yarn than the other. I haven't tested that yet, but that could be the case because of the way you create the fabric. But on the main part, like the fabric you get is the same fabric. The threads go the same way. So yeah, that's something to keep your mind on when you interchange those. I think in the future, when I am knitting a brioche pattern, I will use the Fisherman's rib because I like that look better when I knit it. Another person might choose the different way. I made this video to show you that it can look different, but in basic it's the same. So do whatever you want. Do with it whatever you want. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made some things clear for you. And until the next time, bye!